right, well, thank you, Wayne, for that kind introduction, and for Pat for allowing me to speak. When Pat called me, she said, Tim, I want some stories. And so I said, sure, I have some stories. So I'd like to start with a Wayne Hale story. So in 2009, SAS was 2 years in business. We were a fledgling small company, and so we decided it was time to do a marketing event, sort of spread our wings, so to speak. And so we picked a marketing event, and we picked this conference. And so typically, as a small company, we quickly put together some marketing material. Pat gave us a great deal on boot space, and we packed up the car and drove down here to Las Cruces. And so, as typical of a small business, we all have to wear many hats. And so I was the designee to be the man to man the booth, to be the booth babe, so to speak. And so on one of the breaks, lo and behold, who walks by and stops but Wayne Hale. And Wayne, being as inquisitive as ever, asked what SAS did. And I explained that, I resigned from NASA and we started the business in Boulder, Colorado, and that we did, strategic work and tactical engineering work, and of course, our spaceflight safety products and services. I said, Wayne, we don't build the spacecraft, but we help our clients become successful and safer in their systems. So with that, he was intrigued. And I said, well, Wayne, next time I'm in Houston, I'd like to stop by and talk to you about human spaceflight lessons learned. And so several months later, my wife and I were at Johnson Space Center. And we met Wayne in his office in Building 1. And as we were leaving, he said, oh, by the way, and he hands me a thick envelope. And so I take the envelope, put it in my pocket, and we walk out of Building 1. And my wife, Heather, says, Tim, what's in the envelope? And I said, well, I know how much NASA civil servants make, so I don't think it's an envelope full of $100 bills. So we get in the car, open up the envelope, pull out all the paperwork, and we look, and it's Wayne's resume. And I turned to my wife, and I said, I think Wayne wants to come and work for us. So as I say, the rest is history. We are blessed to have Wayne part of the SAS family. He's been with us for 6 years as my Director of Human Spaceflight and Strategic Services. So good things do happen at this conference, and you just never know who you're going to meet. I would like to share another story, one more relevant now to this year's conference. In 2000, I was asked to join NASA's Launch Services program at Kennedy Space Center after working on the successful Atlas III and RD-180 program at Lockheed Martin. Yes, I'm one of those guys. So for those of you who don't know, NASA LSP procures all the big rockets for NASA's critical science missions, Pluto New Horizon, the Mars missions, etc. So as a new NASA engineer, I thought it was within my responsibility and the NASA LSP organization's charter to promote new ideas, come up with new missions, and create new reliable launch vehicles. So being in my position a little more than a year, I decided to write a concept paper for an AIAA conference and promote such ideas. I followed the format, submitted my abstract, and over the course of several months put the paper and presentation together. In July of 2002, at the AIAA Joint Propulsion Conference in Indianapolis, I presented a paper titled Keeping the Dream Alive, a proposal for future utilization of ELVs, a rather innocuous title about a better, safer, and cost-effective way to send NASA astronauts to low Earth orbit on the new Atlas V and Delta IV launch vehicles. Now, as a young NASA engineer, I did not realize, for the record, that there was a NASA approval process on papers or presentations. So I prepare my presentation, fly to the conference. Now, I'm sure there are many of you in this audience who have presented papers at AIAA conferences. Small rooms, small groups of people, all very quaint. In this particular case, my audience was about this size. Great, more people to share my ideas with. I started my presentation discussing the aspects of the new vehicles with improved design reliability and how effective small teams performing engineering and mission assurance are more effective than large teams. I recommended cost-effective approaches, recommendations such as, let's consider block buys and maybe mission-unique kits for human-rated missions. Ultimately, I said, well, if the rockets were built to launch the nation's most expensive and national security payloads, well, then why couldn't NASA just human rate them to launch astronauts into low Earth orbit? As I finished my presentation, I asked if there were any questions, and the room was silent. Several senior people were in the front row, senior aerospace people. They were smiling. One of them raised his hand and I eagerly said yes, and his statement will always be cemented into my memory. He said, "Tim, refreshing presentation. But we usually hear presentations like this from folks retiring from NASA, not just starting their career. You do realize what you're presenting steps on big toes." Uh-oh, I'm thinking, step on big toes, what does that mean? The second question was from a lady in the back of the room, and she still works at NASA Kennedy. She's waving her hand, cell phone to her ear, and I said, "Of course, yes." And she looks at me and she says, "Tim, who at NASA Kennedy approved your presentation?" I said, "Approved? Well, no one approved it." And I could see her, lips moving, talking to someone on her cell phone, and it sounded like, yes, LSP, Tim Bulk, B-U-L-K. So at this point, I get that hot, tingling feeling. You know it, when you've really stepped in it, and now you think you've been reported. So I quickly gather up my presentation, and I scurry out of the room. And so the rest of the conference just passes quickly, because typically when you think you've done something wrong, you have those thoughts of impending doom that filled my weekend. So Monday came quickly. I found myself back at NASA Kennedy, cowering in my cube. And sure enough, just like when you were a kid and you did something wrong and waited for your dad to drive up that driveway, you knew that he was going to be judge, jury, and executioner. "Tim, can I see you in my office?" Oh boy, here it comes, I thought. And I thought it was nearly impossible to get fired as a NASA civil servant. As my supervisor closed his door, he said, "Tim, please tell me you didn't give a presentation last week at AIAA and propose that this organization human rate ELVs." Well, I said, define human rating. Well, of course, that response didn't help my cause. I did learn one thing, though, in the government, that it was easier to ask for forgiveness than permission. And I was sternly told to please follow the rules and do not be a lightning pole on future papers for this organization. Now let me put things in context in July of 2002. There was no such thing as United Launch Alliance, right? There was the Atlas program by Lockheed Martin and the Delta program by Boeing. The shuttle program was flying successfully, 3 to 4 times a year. And the budget was nearly $3 billion. So I knew that was one big toe I was stepping on. But I was really trying to more augment the assured access to space effort. Unbeknownst to me, several studies, though, were underway at NASA headquarters to study alternative access to station. So it was a surprise when I received a call from NASA Johnson Space Center asking if I could attend a meeting on the challenges of human rating and ELV. Timing is everything. In the fall of 2002, I continued to promote such ideas from a historical perspective on the Atlas and Gemini programs and the differences between design reliability and mission reliability. In December, of course, we were told of a new program, Orbital Spaceplane Program, and the NASA Launch Services Program was going to be part of the integration studies. So by 2003, I was neck deep in understanding not only the differences in technical requirements, but starting to see the differences in safety and engineering cultures between NASA's human spaceflight side and the expendable launch vehicle side. So what originally sounded like a good idea and should be easy ended up being far more technically and emotionally challenging. Debates ensued over such things as safety factors, fracture control, manual control of flight, and emergency detection response. Even with the growing database of flight history and the new vehicles, the debates ensued. With the issues surrounding the Columbia accident investigation and the sensitivities, the OSP program, as we all know, moved from spaceplane concepts to blended lifting bodies to capsules and eventually was designated the Crew Exploration Vehicle and Constellation Program. So 2 outcomes came, what I believe, from the ashes of the OSP program. One, now probably SLS and the Orion program, and the other, NASA's Commercial Crew and Cargo Program, or as we refer to it as the COTS program. So when others fled human spaceflight programs, I jumped into it. I took a transfer from Kennedy to Johnson Space Center, and then the real fun began, because I transferred into the NASA COTS program. As you all know, we were granted a $500 million budget to develop a transportation services for cargo and people to ISS. As we all know, for NASA, this was unprecedented. Small team, limited requirements, and a partnership with industry. So, and I remember we wrote it on the board, we were running a $500 million commercial space transportation experiment. I think we can all agree that 2 new spacecraft, 2 new launch vehicles, 2 new launch sites, and although we've gone through some flight challenges, that the experiment was a success. But I could see change coming. So after 7 years at NASA, I realized, maybe I could be more effective in making others dream a reality if I worked outside the government rather than inside. So to paraphrase Teddy Roosevelt, it was time to get in the ring, get my hands dirty. In 2007, I left NASA and co-founded SAS. Probably not the best time to get a loan in 2007, but we made it happen. In the 16 years of this journey, both inside and outside the government, I realized that there are some significant obstacles and challenges to human spaceflight. And at times, the technical issues are not the obstacle. I see the emotional and cultural part being the obstacle. Now, when I hear things today, such as, how can we human rate an RL-10 engine, even though it's been flying successfully for 50 years? How can we human rate a Russian engine with 71 successes? We need to understand the risks, yes, we're all engineers here, but taking risks does not mean being reckless. Do we understand the requirements? Do we understand design intent? Do we understand how the hardware was certified? This all plays into that response I had of define human rating. I'm a strong believer in good engineering review by experienced people. This does not limit innovation and at times conserves resources, especially under challenging firm fixed price contracts or limited investment. But large people attending a review are also a large, independent, diverse, emotional individuals with multiple points of view and data requests. We need to be careful here because as we move closer to launch dates, more reviews will occur, more risks identified, more time required. A good review team needs to help improve the hardware or process to possibly see those insidious points of failure and to certify the system for a successful mission. Wayne and I, and many others in the industry, have continually pushed for demonstrated success. The American people want to see the successes. They're the investor. They love seeing the pictures of spacecraft docking at the ISS, launching, and now landing. But we all must push for demonstrated successes soon, from the SLS exploration program all the way to commercial crew. This is a time of great change in our industry. The U.S. is developing a human spaceflight exploration system and supporting a market for competitive transportation services to low Earth orbit. No other nation is doing this. This is spawning others privately, as we've seen, building their own systems, chasing their own dreams from suborbital launch to orbital launch. Little did I know, sitting in my cubicle at Johnson Space Center 10 years ago, that this would be our future. So how do we continue to keep this dream alive? I believe this dream is alive and well. But there are some considerations. First, we need to continue to collaborate as a community rather than turn against each other like we did in 2009 and 10. Believe me, as a business owner supporting multiple NASA programs at that time, commercial crew or commercial crew development, the Orion program, Constellation program, we almost went out of business. If it wasn't for agility, luck, perseverance, and persistence from my team and several of you in this audience, I would not be here. Our elected officials must realize that imposed change after getting 80% of the job done will never make the mission cheaper. So we all need to continue and educate them on this point strongly. Second, we need to share lessons learned in times of setbacks, and we will all have setbacks. In the past, we used to share knowledge more freely, and I think we need to get back to that, especially with the larger use of commercial off-the-shelf parts and alternative uses of them. For example, in SIS's commercial aviation aerospace manufacturing business, our competitors get together and share knowledge about the supply chain. Yes, we are competitors, but you never know when you're going to have to turn to them and say, I really need your help here. Third, as an industry government team, we must continue to understand the risks. And I believe from what we're hearing, the biggest risk is the financial risk. So let's go back and look at those lessons learned from the COTS program. And there are some great lessons learned there. Getting across that valley of death is very hard, and the government helped getting those companies across that valley of death. So let's continue and investigate some potential other COTS programs. Maybe a commercial space station COTS program. Maybe a lunar COTS program. Things to consider to keep the dream alive. We're all here because we all have a dream of sending people going safely and often into space. First suborbital, low Earth orbit, moon, and even Mars. And we're so close. I believe we're in the final miles of the marathon, as I like to look at it, from what we saw this morning. And we don't want to stumble now. If we can persist, not give up, as what we've been saying here, keep going forward and get over those hurdles, we'll all get across, as my astronaut friends say, that thin blue finish line. So as we say at SIS, who dreams wins. Thank you.